In today's video, we're going to look at sources of water pollution. This is for the IGCSE Edexcel specification. I've highlighted the section there where we need to know reasons for variations in water quality, including pollution from sewage, industrial waste and agriculture. So I'm going to start with agriculture. There are a couple of ways in which agriculture can affect the water quality of a river. First of all, we can see here that a tractor is putting lots of fertilizers all over the field. Well, if that fertilizer soaks into the groundwater and then eventually goes through groundwater flow and seeps into the river, then there can be problems, especially for aquatic life. Fertilizers often deplete oxygen levels, and therefore it can kill off any aquatic life, marine life that we have in there. Similarly, we might use slurry on fields as a type of fertilizer. Slurry comes from cow manure and water. When I spread that on the fields, again, it can run off directly into rivers or through the groundwater. And again, this can create algae blooms that will kill off marine life. I've given an example of an algae bloom here. The process is called Eutrophication. And this essentially means where any of those excess nutrients that we find in fertilizers or slurry, they get added to the water source, and over time they lead to lots of algae bloom, which is this green stuff on top, and that eventually leads to lower oxygen levels in the water, which is why we get fish dying, unfortunately, and a decrease in any sort of aquatic life in the rivers and lakes. Another example of water pollution in agriculture is if I start cutting down trees to deforest to create farms, any loose soil and silt that's on the top will eventually run off when it rains into rivers. And again, this can make it unsuitable for humans to drink. It can alter the ecosystem, which means that we might have migration in marine life, or marine life might not be able to survive under those conditions. The next major category is industry. Here we've got a power station. Power stations often use water. They use it in the cooling towers, and they use it actually to create steam to turn the turbines to create electricity. That water then can sometimes be put back in rivers. The problem we get here is that the water is often at a higher temperature, and because of that, the water that was returned to these rivers can again alter any sort of marine life because it's slightly higher than the natural temperature of the river. Here is an example of an oil spill. These can come from refineries or factories. This again runs directly off, can be dumped straight into rivers or the sea. And again, oil is an incredibly toxic substance. That means you couldn't drink that water if you're a human or animal. It can obviously have really adverse effects on any aquatic life. It sticks to the fur of things like otters and seabirds. It can lead to quite severe effects, like it stops them being able to regulate their own temperature, and so that they can actually die from that. Here's another example where water has been used to process minerals from mining. So they've used it to kind of clean off so they can actually get to the ores. Unfortunately, that's been dumped again back into a river. So it makes its way into the river. And this is full of heavy metals, things like lead and arsenic, which again, when are drunk by humans, is very, very toxic. Last category is domestic. This is to do with our homes. When we put untreated sewage into the rivers from our homes, directly dumping it, this can lead to very serious diseases if humans drink it. So things like typhoid. This doesn't happen a lot in developed countries, but here we can see an example in developing country where we've got very poor sanitation. We don't have good sewers. People often dump their fecal matter and their sewage straight into the river, and therefore that leads to these problems in terms of water pollution. Another example where in a developing country we don't have maybe the facilities to clean our own clothes in a home, so people might wash clothes in a river, therefore any dirt from the clothes enters the river directly, and this makes the water unsuitable for drinking and cooking. The obvious thing I've kind of just mentioned there is developed countries often have the money to be able to treat and manage sources of pollution, where developing countries don't. Obviously, a lot of developing countries are also going through that secondary industrial stage, and therefore they have got more sources of pollution that are adding to the problem. However, there are variations in water quality in rivers in all countries, even in developed countries, and I've just put this in at the end to show that there is sewage that gets dumped into the Thames. Here in London, obviously there's lots of people living here, and so there is still waste being put into the river. If you go further up nearer the source, you might not find the same variations in water quality, and actually might be cleaner because less humans, but also less sources of pollution.